for a while there, Greater Portland was the cool kid. We had a reputation for creativity and innovation, and all that in one of the most beautiful places in the world. We attracted waves of young, educated workers, and that talent attracted business. And while we still had work to do, together, we recruited, we built. We were near the top of our game. But even the greatest face challenges. Today, our region is slipping as an attractive place to do business. Most of the reasons are complex. And right now, our region is experiencing a crisis of identity. And we don't want that crisis to go to waste. Today, we can transform our region, and more than becoming the cool kid again, we can build a place where we rise to our greatest potential for our families and for our community. It's with this vision that together we answer the call to become champions of transformation.
And now, please welcome your host for this morning, from the Oregonian, Amy Lewin.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. What a beautiful morning. For those who got up early, I hope you got a chance to see the sunrise and the rainbow that literally landed in the heart of our city this morning in our region. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the annual Greater Portland Economic Summit. And whether it's here in person or from your home or office on live stream, we're glad you're here. It's been a crazy year and a half, but that just makes it more meaningful that we've all come together today. This year's theme is Champions of Transformation, and we'll be shining a light on the road to our region's recovery this morning. Our keynote speaker is Kofi Bonner, CEO of Bedrock. Bedrock is a Detroit real estate firm that was key in the city's impressive comeback. He's going to share from the roadmap that empowered Detroit to rise up from the ashes and from his own personal experiences as well. We're really excited to have you all hear more about Kofi's experience. We'll also be hearing from two local executives who made the decision to expand in Greater Portland this year. You're going to want to hear those fascinating stories that led to those decisions. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. We've done everything we can to ensure a safe environment for all our in-person attendees. Hand sanitizer is available at each of your tables, and masks are available at the entryway. We ask that you wear your mask at all times, except when eating or drinking at your table. And if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's to adapt and embrace new technology. So in that spirit, this morning's program is accessible via the QR code printed on the sign in the middle of your table. Feel free to tag us and share this event on social media with the hashtag GPI Summit. I'm honored to be here this morning, not only here in this room with all of you, but online as well. In this, the space we're in, it's beautifully transformed former industrial foundry. And we all know it's been a busy year. And many of you may know me from my recent work within the Portland business community. In fact, I was reflecting, I think the last time I saw many of you in person was March 11th, 2020, at an economic briefing where we were celebrating 10 years of record economic growth. You all look great, and it's really good to see you, especially for you online too. Welcome. We've been through a lot these last 19 months, and all of us have a story to share of how we've changed, or how we've challenged ourselves to continually show up and be a part of a changing moment or series of moments. For me, 12 months ago, literally, I think tomorrow will be the anniversary, I stepped out of my comfort zone and challenged several of our city's leading communicators to meet and find a way to work together. We were experiencing one of the most dynamic challenges our city had ever faced, and it was affecting the entire region. The outcome? An incredible sequence of partnerships that led to a campaign many of you heard about, the Hero for Portland campaign, but so much more. And at the heart of it was a question: how can you be here for this city, this region we love? We wanted to weave all our voices together, repairing and creating our community story into something that connects elevates, and restores. I called it strategic knitting, but the work led me into something more, which was a volunteer role that I try not to think too hard about, the name, co-chair of the city's Reputation, Recovery, and Rebranding Action Table for the City of Portland. That's the name. I just want to do a shout out to the mayor's team, and Sam Adams in particular, for taking the initiative to create something that was new in a time where we all knew we needed to come together. 5 action tables, one of which is the one I'm proud to co-chair with another extraordinary executive here in our community, but a place for community members to show up and engage in productive dialogue to move our region forward. And thanks to many of you here in the room and online, you've continued to stay engaged over the past several months as leaders and experts contributing and saying, how can I be a part of this? How can I share my experience to move our region forward? That's actually where I had the opportunity to meet Greater Portland Inc.'s new CEO, Monique Claiborne, for the first time. Her work and experiences in Detroit reassured me that this moment of working together for our region's future is possible. It's not always easy, but it's possible. Monique is no stranger to economic development and municipal finance. She was on the ground actively recruiting companies to Detroit during the city's largest municipal bankruptcy. While working at Ernst & Young, she negotiated credits and incentives on behalf of clients for their expansion projects, and she played a role in Detroit's financial turnaround as its legislative operations CFO. Since taking the lead for GPI in February, Monique has helped bring the organization into the future with her data-driven vision for economic development, which she will share with you this morning. Please join me in welcoming the CEO of Greater Portland Inc., Monique Claiborne.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining me here today, those in person and those that are tuning in virtually. My name is Monique Claiborne, President and CEO of Greater Portland. And this is my first time meeting many of you here today in person. And I guess the cat's out of the bag. I'm really tall. In fact, for those tuning in, I'm standing over 6 feet right now. I'm pretty sure one of the tallest women here today. But we're here today because Mike extended an offer to me back in February, and when we met, we echoed how we had both underestimated each other's height. Over the last 7 months, it's been challenging. We've had a continued pandemic, continuing negative press, and continuing disappointment that our beloved Trailblazers still haven't made it to the Western Conference Finals. It's been really stressful. But if I were to sum up the last 7 months, I would use the word dynamism, because that's what the role requires out of me, and that's what the region requires out of GPI. I've learned that you have to be able to pivot at a moment's notice, write out strategic plans as much as possible, but call an audible and be confident in it. But there have been successes over the last 7 months. We're beginning to trickle in new investors. We adopted the 5-year comprehensive economic development strategy, which puts our region on a road to recovery. And we announced Amazon is coming to the city of Canby and worked with Clackamas County along with Business Oregon. And those 500 jobs are critical in the region that's still experiencing over 60,000 in unemployment. So thank you to those in the room that were a part of that success. But we're here today because the future of our region's key industries, businesses, and people are at stake. There will be winners and losers as rival cities and regions compete for said businesses and the people. But Mike didn't hire me for my athleticism. While I'm here to be a part of a team, I'm here to lead one. And I have a bold mission for GPI to ramp up its business recruitment and expansion efforts and tout the competitiveness of the region, because there's still a lot to sell here. But for those where we haven't yet had a virtual coffee, a virtual lunch, a virtual happy hour, a virtual dinner, or some other virtual rendezvous, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from the city of Detroit, where its reputation precedes it. Skyrocket unemployment, crime, corruption, dilapidated and boarded up buildings, a ghost town. Sounds a little bit like Portland right now, right? But I'm a native Detroiter, and that still runs through my blood through and through. And I'll never leave that hometown pride. So I went to the University of Michigan, go Blue, but go Ducks for upsetting Ohio State a few weeks ago, and decided to move to New York and do investment banking. And for the bankers in the room, I did derivatives on tax-exempt bonds. But I wanted my work to have a little bit more purpose, and so I packed my bags, moved to London, England, enrolled in a master's in international public policy program, and worked at the Clinton Foundation. The plan was to go work at the World Bank, right? They fund international development projects, but the world recession happened, global recession, financial crash, and my parents welcomed me with open arms back to Detroit. But here I am. I have all these skills, and I thought, how can I bring foreign direct investment to Detroit? And so there the story began. But this is when the story takes a little bit of an interesting turn. I met a guy, and he decided to move to Portland. And I couldn't have been more clear. Do not tell me to come to Portland as your girlfriend. I'm not doing it. And I guess he listened, because instead, he asked me to be his wife, and the rest is history. I fell in love with the city, with the region, with the state when I moved here. And in homage to the city, we named our daughter Savannah Rose. I've lived here now 4 years, and I can tell you the region has changed so much in the last 4 years, due in partly because of a pandemic. But I was drawn to the role at GPI because I saw obvious parallels with the city of Detroit, and it being this tale of two cities. Greater Portland, too, is now a place where its reputation precedes itself. Historically known for sustainability, footwear, innovation, is now being overshadowed by violent protests and social unrest. But while Detroit and Portland couldn't be more culturally different, there are obvious parallels, and I hope to bring some of those lessons learned from Detroit to Portland. Detroit, a decade ago, started to turn the tide through the sheer will and commitment of a few private sector, public, and philanthropic folks. And it's been able to rebrand itself and not be so reliant on the automotive industry, but become known as a place for opportunity and entrepreneurism. Like Detroit, Greater Portland is in fierce competition, not only with others, but with itself. And right now, its identity is truly in peril. But we can't let this crisis go to waste. We can be better than the past, and we can be whoever we want in the future. One thing that I found really remarkable when I first moved to Portland was all the Black Lives Matter signs, but no black folks. It was so bizarre, and I'm still wrapping my mind around it. But over time, I really, truly believe there is a commitment from organizations and the people that work there from the top to the bottom that diversity, equity, and inclusion are important. So when I talk about GPI ramping up its business attraction efforts, I'm not talking about us going after trophy projects. This is personal. As I said, I'm pretty sure I'm one of the tallest women in the room here, but I'm also one of the few women of color. And so it's very personal for me that I'm making it a commitment that GPI will attract and go after companies that's welcoming to all, that's paying livable wages, and it's true quality of life and treats its workers fairly. We have to have pathways for opportunity for everyone. Our region's success depends on it because everyone has something to bring to the table. While I'm not new to Portland, and I'm not new to business attraction, what I am new to is the alphabet soup of all the organizations doing economic development in this space. And so in true form, I made a Venn diagram. And I've actually had people ask for this. GPI is the only public-private partnership working to attract trader sector businesses to our bi-state region. There's no one else doing it. So you all bought a ticket for our summit, but you also enrolled in Business Attraction 101. So what's traded sector business? Traded sector business are businesses that are here, but their revenue and their customers are not here. Local business is businesses that are here, but their customers and their revenue, they're here. And so the big distinction between local business and traded sector business is the dollars and where they're coming from. Traded sector businesses brings and pumps in new dollars into our economy, whereas local businesses, it's just circulating the same dollar. And so therefore, traded sector businesses and attracting that to the region, it's critical because it supports local business. Traded sector businesses can be small, medium, large, you name it, and they're all critical to our success. And we're gonna hear from Twist later on today and why they chose Portland. Now here's a pop quiz. Tell me something that's more tangible to a prosperous economy more than jobs. I'll wait and look forward to hearing your answer after the program. But without job growth, we will continue to have a decline in our tax base, and our quality of life, and philanthropy, and our net disposable income. In an era where there's fierce competition and technology is leveling the playing field, we must be intentional about job growth. Many of our rivals already have very strong public-private partnerships and even stronger and well-funded economic development organizations. They are hard at work improving their competitive posture and aggressively chasing down jobs and companies that we hope magically come to Portland. So you just passed 101. Now we're going to 102. Over the last year, Greater Portland has fallen behind in job growth. And I know this chart looks a lot, but I'm going to break it down for you. Even more troubling, we're losing the game right now. So here we have 2021 competitive jobs growth to 2031. And this isn't total jobs, it's just the clusters and industries that we're competitive. So think athletic, outdoor, footwear, semiconductor. So Boise, Salt Lake City, you see Greater Portland, we're third. Okay, Boise's 50,000 competitive jobs over the next 10 years. Okay, Phoenix, almost 400,000. Well, that's just showing that we're in a smaller market. But what this graph really shows is projected growth, which is the far right axis. We're at 3% over the next 10 years. Phoenix, they're at 12%. Seattle, 10%. Even Boise, in a smaller market, they're at 6%. You all, the race has started, the gun has sounded, and we're not even in the blocks right now. There's a professor out of MIT that did a study and said 80% of job growth comes from current businesses, existing businesses already within the region. And so virtually economic development organizations uses that 20%, right? So let me make it clear. 20% of projected job growth is up for grabs. 20% of projected job growth is because of business attraction efforts. And so, if we do a little math, of the competitive job growth in our competitive industries, 20% equates to 40,000 jobs that's up for grabs right now. Okay, so Monique, what does all this mean? What are we talking about? Jobs. So let's just move on a little further. I'm gonna first tell you what other rival economic development organizations are doing right now, because I benchmarked it. I called them up myself to find out if 20%'s up for grabs, what are you responsible for? Greater Portland, Inc. over the last 2 years, and this is during the pandemic, we brought in 200 plus jobs, 500 last year. Salt Lake City, nearly 3,000 over the last 2 years. Phoenix, nearly 10,000 over the last 10 years. Denver, about 7,000 each over the last 2 years, and Boise, 10,000. We're not even 10% of what other economic development organizations are doing. So where do we start, Monique? Why are you telling us this? What's the plan? So I believe GPI can be responsible for 20,000 jobs over the next 10 years. Remember, we talked about that 80-20 rule. And this is how we're gonna get there. Our target this year for GPI was a little over 200 jobs. I mentioned earlier the Amazon Attraction Project. We've now brought in 530 jobs. So over the next 10 years, to get to 20,000, if we incrementally increase our efforts, we can become and bring in over 4,000 jobs in the next 10 years, and that'll get us to our 20,000. So, numbers don't lie, and in fact, they help you guide your way home. And so, I then had to run a model, an economic impact analysis to say, well, what does 20,000 jobs really mean, Monique? And so, I'm gonna let this sit in for you. But 20,000 new jobs over the next 10 years equates to $1.9 billion in payroll total income. 20,000 new jobs over the next 10 years equals $3.1 billion in our contribution to GDP. 20,000 new jobs equates to $8.7 billion in total value of industry production coming out of our region. So, there are 3 ways to win a race: your shoes, your technique, and your motivation. So let me tell you how I'm gonna form our technique. The pandemic has truly transformed the way we do business. Employees are working from home, businesses are investing in technology, we have preschoolers in digital classrooms, we have telemedicine apps, grocery delivery apps. Before, data security and artificial intelligence was just for the big tech firms. But now, if you want to be competitive in this market, you too have to invest in technology. Economic development and GPI are no different. If we want to dominate our race, we have to be quick to adopt technology. And going forward, GPI will adopt a data-driven strategy where we can get to those 20,000 jobs over the next 10 years. In the past, we've relied heavily on our relationships with our community partners, relationships with site consultants, which are consultants that companies hire to do their location advisory work. And then we've relied on companies coming, hopefully that they reach out to us. And while those relationships are important, and we'll continue to cultivate them, we have to be more proactive. And I'm transforming the way GPI does business. We will deepen our research and do our homework and refine our target industries. We're not gonna go after just all footwear companies. We're gonna really refine our market and say, what's the sweet spot for companies if they come to Portland? We're gonna harness technology and utilize a predictive analytics tool with customized algorithms and artificial intelligence that help us better pinpoint and pursue companies that are on the verge of expansion. And we're gonna refine our pitch. What acute business need are we truly solving? And articulate that better when we're talking to companies. This new data-driven approach is the technique we desperately need. But my question to you all today is, do we have the motivation? Are you willing to haul ass to get across the finish line? Now, I know I said I'm not an athlete, but this girl from Detroit, she's not a spectator either. I'm in this race, and it's a relay, and I'm passing the baton to you. Are you lacing up your shoes? Are you gonna help us and help this region win our race? Thank you.
Monique, thank you. I'm ready to lace up my shoes and join you. All right, it's my honor to introduce this morning's keynote, and you've all got your 101 lesson on what we can do and what that path looks like, but it's always helpful to hear from others who have had a shared experience, and I'm so pleased to welcome our keynote, Kofi Bonner, who has a proven record as an architect of transformation. Kofi is the CEO of Bedrock, a Detroit-based real estate firm that was key in the city's revitalization and has invested more than $5.6 billion, that's billion, in developments throughout Detroit and Cleveland. Kofi began his career developing affordable housing in Oakland and soon took a job as redevelopment director for the nearby city of Emeryville. In Emeryville, he led the transformation of that town from a toxic relic of the industrial era into a thriving retail, life sciences, and commercial center. Emeryville is now the home of Pixar Animation, Adobe Systems, Bayer, and Peet's Coffee. Kofi left the public sector in 1998 to serve as Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer for the Cleveland Browns, the first African American to hold the title in the NFL. Kofi returned to the Bay Area several years later, where he led some of the largest urban developments in the country, including the San Francisco Shipyard and Candlestick Communities projects. In recent years, Kofi has embarked on real estate ventures in both the Bay Area and his home country of Ghana, and invested in fintech companies serving West Africa. And now to share more of his roadmap for transforming a community, please welcome Kofi Bonner.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you very much. Monique, that was stirring. I'm not an athlete either, but I'm ready to run the race with you. That was great. That was great. And perhaps one of the things I particularly liked was one of the first images you showed up there as you were bringing your Detroit roots in was the Book Tower, which you know well. And the Book Tower is actually one of the buildings Bedrock is rehabilitating. And that historic building will be, in 2.5 years, will be about 300 apartments. So, but congratulations on your appointment. I think GPI is in great hands. So anyway, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for inviting me, Monique. Thanks for allowing me to actually begin some semblance of normalcy, right? I mean, isn't this great? Here we are, sort of actually interacting with each other. I've had the opportunity to do a couple of these on Zoom calls, and it's actually not quite the same thing, you know? You talk into the camera, then you end. So, look, this is actually the second time I've been in Portland, and I've never had a bad meal here yet, so that's good. You should add that to one of your business attraction things, because that matters for companies as they're coming in. And the first time I came, I was a chief operating officer for a publicly traded company called 5 Point. 5 Point's a master plan community developer based in Irvine, California. And we were struggling with the construction costs in San Francisco, go figure. And we were particularly interested in sort of the mass timber industry and the really innovative construction techniques that, frankly, are right here in this region. Outside of Europe and Canada, candidly, you guys have some of the more innovative systems, and that's why we came out. Stayed in a lovely little boutique hotel on the river. It was fabulous. And then our host took me to this really, really interesting pub in Portland. I hear you have quite a few pubs here. And I grew up in England, so I'm partial to beer every now and then. So I know a good beer. And I had a good beer there. But what was even particularly interesting is this space I was in had a really interesting history. Apparently it was built in like 1800 and something. And it started life as a brothel. But now it's a very good pub. I don't know. But it was good. So, I am often asked, now that I've been CEO of Bedrock for about a year, I'm often asked, so what led you to leave the Bay Area? And I will tell you that in March of 2020, I had actually retired. I had been leading development in the Bay Area for 15 years or so. And I've never had the privilege of actually trying to develop in this neck of the woods, but I can tell you that developing in California will wear you out. So I put my time in and I retired. But my wife and I had all these elaborate plans of what we were going to do. We were going to go cruising, this, that, and the other. But remember, it's March 2020. So I retired, and a week later, I'm out on my deck with nothing to do, nowhere to go. And headhunter called, I forget it, I'm retired. Called a few times, and then finally we said, yeah, what the heck, I'm home, let me check it out. Bedrock sounds interesting. And my wife and I went to Detroit. Now remember that I was the chief administrative officer of the Cleveland Browns from 1998 to 2004 or so. And I had occasion to go with the team to play the Detroit Lions in a preseason game. So I actually, in 2002, and I actually went through downtown Detroit, and I can tell you, downtown Detroit was, let me say, decidedly gritty at that time. So going back in 2020 and seeing this transformation, how positive the impact had been of, frankly, Dan Gilbert's move into downtown and just the activity down there. And even in the pandemic, there was still this energy there, and I thought, this is really special. So I really was impressed, but I wasn't ready to commit. So I didn't commit until I had the occasion and really honor to have a conversation with Dan and Jen Gilbert. And I asked Dan, so what's your vision for Detroit and Bedrock? And Dan said it purely, succinctly, and very elegantly. He had a passion and desire to secure Detroit's place in the world as a 21st century world-class city. That was it. He didn't talk about, well, I really need to grow my bottom line, I really need to grow my real estate portfolio, I need to do this with real estate, I need to do that. No. He was all about that city. He was all in because he knew if he could bring that city back, all the assets would also grow in value. So it captured my attention because our work in Detroit isn't about building a portfolio. It's really about growing that city. So we call it city building. And that's what we do. We characterize our work as city building in the cities of Detroit and the city of Cleveland. And I was candidly drawn to this opportunity to work alongside these like-minded individuals who had experience and history and, frankly, the resources to really bring a positive impact into these two great cities. So that's really why I literally got off the couch. And Detroit is rebuilding from its core. Downtown Detroit now is a mix of those physical amenities. I mean, these beautiful historic buildings, many of which we have restored. Bedrock started about 10 years ago with 102 properties. We're now at 100 properties in the downtown core. But not only are we rebuilding and remodeling some of these, and renovating these properties, but we're also working with the city in the downtown spaces and creating a mix of activities. Even in the vacant spaces that we own, we're enlivening them with animation. Last year in the pandemic, we needed to encourage people to come downtown because our retailers were struggling. So we created a drive-in. We had 3.5 acres in downtown. We created a drive-in, and people came downtown with their families, watched the movie safely, masked up, and they went out and had a few cocktails out on the patios. This summer, we turned that same area into a roller rink. So people were skating in an outdoor roller rink. It was fabulous. So currently, Bedrock is about 7.5 million square feet of office downtown, about 800 apartment units, about 400,000 square feet of retail right on a main spine in Woodward. And we're currently working on several other, almost 2.5 million square feet of office and several more apartments. And we're continuing to release our retail spaces with a mix of local and international tenants, but we continue to also activate these spaces. But now I've been here a year, I'm asked, so what do I consider to be my biggest challenge? And I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about that because I believe it's likely why we are all engaged in the work we do. And it speaks to the importance of why organizations like GPI are so important for the city building, or region building in this case, efforts. I mean, my biggest challenge is the same challenge I've had with every major urban development I have had. It's the challenge for all of us in city building. How do we collectively lead, direct, and manage change in a global economy to the advantage of our cities, our businesses, and our communities? As the CEO of Bedrock, how can I lead Bedrock to provide direction and leadership such that our real estate activities provide a platform to encourage growth, innovation, and frankly leads to an enhanced commercialization and an increased and enhanced quality of life for the residents and visitors. You know, I'm sure we can agree that it is important to strengthen the core cities and regions, because as core cities get stronger, regions get stronger. Yeah, there'll always be, it's always been the case that the core city and the suburb cities always have some sort of push and pull, but fundamentally as a region, I think we have to agree that core cities are critical to the health and growth of regions. So anyway, one of the questions, of course, is when Dan says we want Detroit to be a world-class city, what does that even mean? And it's interesting. There's a wonderful, brilliant woman called Rosabeth Moss Kanter, and she wrote a book several years ago, that World-Class, Thriving Locally in a Global Economy. And the book speaks to the need to attract and create an environment where our cities stimulate greater innovation. For Detroit, that would mean expanding its role as an arena for innovation. As you've read or heard my bio, I spent many years as a public official leading business and economic development in several cities in the Bay Area: Emeryville, Oakland, and San Francisco. And to respond to this challenge of leadership, I have to look back to what I've learned over the years from both my private sector life and my public sector life. But the first thing I learned is the power of public financing. You know, when private capital is aligned and leveraged by public financing, the resultant developments are more bold, they're more visionary, and frankly, they have much further reaching impacts. The cities of Emeryville and San Francisco, I think, provide real good examples of that. First, Emeryville. Look, Emeryville was an industrial city. It was created in 1897. And it was essentially created because the industrialists of the time, they were part of Oakland, they decided they didn't like Oakland's higher taxes and diminishing public services. They said, forget it. We're creating our own town where we rule. So they did. 1.2 square mile city, adjacent to the city of Oakland, well, so almost engulfed by the city of Oakland and adjacent to the city of Berkeley. And they ruled. There's about very few residents, and it was mostly industry. And it was, those industries were primarily the western home of some significant companies: Fisher Body, Westinghouse, Pfizer Paint Factory, Birmingham Steel, Del Monte Cannery, and they were all there in Emeryville. And it was ruled by the industrialists, and with all due respect to the industrialists here, Chief Justice Earl Warren once said that Emeryville was the rottenest city in the Pacific Coast. So you can imagine. Emeryville's tax base was derived solely from industry. And I presume it worked well for them. But guess what happened? Global economy happened. Those industries started looking elsewhere. They started looking elsewhere for cheaper land, cheaper labor, and they left. But what did they leave the city with? Old, antiquated warehouses and a large variety of railroad spurs crisscrossed all over the city, and frankly, a great deal of industrial waste and remediation problems. In the 1980s, the city of Emeryville created a master plan for their city, and that master plan was important, sort of laying out how they wished the city to grow, but more importantly, they also created a public financing plan. They created a plan that would essentially begin to address the aging infrastructure, that would really begin to lay out a platform, an urban platform, that would enable new businesses to come in. And they also created a financing plan that was based on the old California redevelopment law, which basically said, to the extent that businesses are growing and generating increased and enhanced property taxes, that increase in tax increment could be reimbursed back to the businesses to fund the change and the rebuild of the infrastructure. So that's what Emeryville set about doing. Then they did another really creative thing. Emeryville went to the state officials who were in charge of all the remediation. They went to Cal EPA, they went to the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and their own public health officials in Alameda County, and they crafted a plan with those health officials. And that plan essentially admitted the fact that, look, we're primarily an industrial city, and so the contamination from one site goes into another site very easily, and another site flows into another site. And so trying to get each and every property owner to try to remediate those particular areas was almost impossible, because everybody would point to everybody else. Well, mine's this and yours is that. So what they basically agreed to was a citywide remediation plan. And they got those participants to participate in the remediation plan for the city. It was really, really creative, and it was a very difficult negotiation at the time. And through these investments and when the realization of the vision came through, the city of Emeryville began to attract investors and businesses, because those same investors and businesses were at the same time struggling to do businesses in places like Berkeley, San Francisco, and Oakland. I used to say to folks that, look, private capital is really very easy to understand. We're in the public sector. Private capital flows to the path of least resistance for the most part. So the more resistance the cities put up to private capital, the more likely they'll find other places to go to. And they did. So Emeryville was very intentional about trying to find ways to hasten the way the entitlements came through. They were very clear in how the building code could work. They even created flexible building codes, so that it was easier to convert some of these industrial buildings into, frankly, live, work, and other places. And slowly but surely, modern-day Emeryville has effectively transformed. It's diversified its tax base. It's a modern mixed-use urban center. Thousands of units of housing now, probably about 10,000 from the 2,400 when I started there. It's about 10,000 homes there, and several of which are affordable, several million square feet of life sciences and entrepreneurial space. And it's home to places like Pixar and Chiron. Now, I'll tell you a funny story about Pixar, because I mentioned earlier how difficult it was to develop in the Bay Area. Certainly in those days, Emeryville was no different. And we took it upon ourselves that this tiny city, we were going to go after the regional headquarters of Kaiser. Now, Kaiser's headquarters is Oakland. Now, Kaiser, unfortunately for them, in Oakland, had been trying to build their regional headquarters and expand their hospital system in Oakland for several, frankly, I think decades, and the city of Oakland just wasn't being, let's say, friendly. So we just reached across the border and said, hey, Kaiser, we've got a large 14-acre site here. Why don't you come over here and we'll make things easy for you? And Kaiser said, well, you're only 2 miles away from where we thought we'd go, so this would work. So we started the hard work within the city, the alignment of the staff and the city council and the businesses. We started the hard work of assembling the last pieces of property, creating a remediation plan, and putting the environmental documents together to go through the California Environmental Quality Act process. As it turns out, there are a few angry people in the city of Oakland that this tiny city was attempting to take Kaiser. And the person who chose to lead that effort against Kaiser coming to Emeryville had just come off a run to be president of the United States. You now know him as Governor Jerry Brown. And Governor Jerry Brown had decided at that point that he was going to become mayor of Oakland, and this was a wonderful cause to support the city of Oakland. And so here we are in our this is a tiny city, remember that. Tiny but beautiful and elegant council chambers. And it's packed with opponents from the city of Oakland, led by Jerry Brown. And I'll never forget sitting in that chamber, and Jerry comes in with the volumes of environmental analysis that has to be done these days. And he comes in and he slams it on the lectern, and he basically says, I've read every word of these documents, and it's wholly inadequate. Very interesting. The city council didn't wilt. They came together 5-0, and they passed that document, and lo and behold, Little Emeryville had approved the plan to bring Kaiser to Emeryville. Now, that wasn't the rest of the story, though, because politics does play a role in these things. And Kaiser was one of those too big to leave. And the politics played a role, and Kaiser was persuaded to stay in Oakland. But because we had taken the time to really create a piece of property that was assembled, cleaned, and it had actually been set up for a major development, there was at the same time we were going through this, there was a tiny company, a relatively small company in the city of Richmond that had decided that they were looking to move closer into the bay. And they looked at this site, it was already assembled, and boom, we made a deal, and they moved into the city of Emeryville. And that company is called Pixar. And the global headquarters of Pixar is where we had originally entitled for Kaiser. So another area that shows the power of public financing, of course, is San Francisco. And this is the San Francisco Mission Bay area. Now, some of you may know the story of today, but many years ago, Mission Bay was owned by Santa Fe Pacific Realty. Before that, Realty became Catellus, and Catellus had been trying to entitle that property for decades. And then a certain Mayor Willie Brown came in, and Mayor Willie Brown was struggling with the notion that UCSF had been trying to expand in the Parnassus Heights area of San Francisco, and they were trying to leave because they needed to expand to compete. And the city of San Francisco, God bless them, were making it hard for UCSF to grow. So Mayor Willie Brown said to Catellus, I'll tell you what, if you agree to go to Mission Bay and plant your new campus there, I will help you. I will help you entitle the 300 acres that is your property, and more importantly, I will also provide the public financing to help you remediate the property and to create the new infrastructure. And lo and behold, Mission Bay sprang up. And Mission Bay now is arguably, probably, I would say, one of the most successful innovation districts in the country. It is home to Kaiser. Sure. Thank you. Is this better? It is home to, I said Kaiser, I'm sorry. It's home to the UCSF, of course, as its sporting headquarters. It is home to the Mark Benioff Children's Hospital. It is home now to millions of square feet of life sciences. But along the way, new technologies came up, new innovation came up, and it's also home to Dropbox and Uber. And then the Warriors, when they threatened to leave, the then mayor said, well, what about Mission Bay? And now that's also home to Chase Arena, where the Golden State Warriors obviously play. So, again, what do you find there? That here is yet another opportunity for where the power of public financing and leadership from the public sector in partnership with the private sector created what I think is a transformational development. Because not only were these commercial developments built, but also there was a significant amount of housing was built. And 20% of the housing, the thousands of units, are all affordable. So I can actually truly say that without the essential tool of and leverage of public financing, it would have been almost impossible for me to have had some of the success I've had within the urban development realm that I've had the pleasure of working on. The other thing that is really clear to me is that the alignment of interests between the public sector and the private sector are incredibly essential, because nothing can occur at scale and with permanence without that shared vision between the public and private sectors. And when I say a shared vision, it's not just sort of the idea, because if people can collectively get around an idea, a vision, a picture, but when people commit to it individually within each business, then I think we really begin to get some real magic happening. One of the things that we were able to do in Emeryville, which just showed the power of that public-private partnership and the shared commitment from the businesses, developers, and the frankly, the elected officials. By the way, Emeryville had one of those rotating city councils, so they always had to be together over that time frame, and they were. At some point, Emeryville was growing so fast, the old transit system within the city just wasn't working. So it was getting harder and harder to get employees in and out of that city. And when we approached the transit authority then, they said, well, Emeryville, you're too small. You're not right at that scale that we would merit moving our transit corridors. So we came up with a plan. We went to the business community and said, would you allow us to assess you to start a transit piece? And the businesses said yes, because they realized that with the growth of business, it meant the growth in property values, and obviously we were able to convince them. They were convinced already, Ken, it wasn't that hard. And we created a transit system specifically for the city of Emeryville, which tied into the greater transit areas. And I think that's just a great testament to when the private sector and the public sector come together to solve problems. I think really, as I say, I think magic happens. 2 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of sharing the stage with Mayor Frank Jackson of Cleveland. And the mayor had been working on a plan for many years called the Vision for the Valley, for the riverfront area of Cleveland. And we looked at that at Bedrock, and we own quite a significant amount of property in Cleveland. We looked at that, and we decided that we could be their public-private partner to initiate the first component of that plan. And so we came up with a very specific plan to take about 130 acres, of which we owned about 30%, to really create more links to the downtown, improve the riverfront, create a whole new riverfront neighborhood that actually had activated spaces and as I say, much better pedestrian-friendly streets, to bring that older city back into the riverfront, because most cities that have active riverfronts actually, I think, much more attractive to companies. So we were able to do that. And fundamentally, our rationale is we're going to position the city of Cleveland to go after all the federal funds that it can by putting our private funds in to begin the process of getting these sites shovel-ready. Because as we all know, the federal government loves shovel-ready sites. But you know, the truth is, for as many successful partnerships as there have been, there are so many that don't happen. And often, in my experience, it often happens because there's a misalignment of expectations. Often the public sector expects more from the private sector. And they often expect the private sector to maybe shoulder a little bit too much of the burden with respect to the community's interests, and the numbers don't work. And so those things don't happen. And unfortunately, when nothing happens, what do we get? The communities often languish, and there continues to be collective hand-wringing about the level of economic disparity in those communities. Now, which brings me to something else that I've learned. And that is the importance of community equity. And that's really more for the private sector side. Because as the private sector, as developers, we are moving forward with these big, bold visions without clearly stated, defined pathways for equitable growth in the communities that we're developing, that success will be self-limiting. Initial portions of development may do great, but as the communities see less and less benefit flowing their way, their voices obviously get louder, opposing future phases, and ultimately those developments die. In other words, when the benefits of a development are seen solely to benefit the developers and their return on their capital, often those public-private partnerships don't work. Those opposing voices for the future investments, as I say, they grow louder. And it's really important that the equitable distribution of benefits occurs to the community, even as the private sector is beginning to get its returns. In many conversations with cities around community benefits, I have learned that the public return on capital for the investment of the public capital is really that social equity. that community equity. And that is evidenced, frankly, by increased access to affordable housing, or accessible to housing, period. The increased access to better education, home security, maybe more home ownership opportunities. And I think this is really important. I really want to emphasize how important that is to just the equation. Now, I will say I continue to learn and adjust and evolve. And the events of the last year have really crystallized my thoughts with respect to some of these things. The devastating effects of the pandemic, social unrest and disruptions, the heightened, ugly political discourse. I mean, look, for those who wish to see, the last 18 months not only brought into sharp focus the inequities in race in this country, but also, frankly, the vulnerabilities of the economics of small businesses. And it is really imperative that as we think about building these solutions together, we really think about ways to grow wealth in these communities and also improve health outcomes and really apply some of these interesting financial techniques to help shore up small businesses. When we stood next to the mayor of Cleveland, we also stood up on the podium with the head of the Gilbert Family Foundation. And so we had the benefit of having a public partner, a private partner, a philanthropic partner. I heard Monique mention the importance of philanthropy. I truly believe that from now on, as we are thinking about building up these cities to create and achieve these bold visions, we absolutely have to think about the inclusion of philanthropy. Because it is that philanthropy which helps us leverage the public return on capital even as the private returns are coming in. And so all three have to be at the table. All three have to be at the table. So look, I will say that I often remind my team in Bedrock that we can go fast when we go alone. We can go buy it, build it, and move on. But we can't go quite as far without the city and our philanthropic partners. And there is much to do coming out of this pandemic. There is so much to do, so much we have to rebuild. And I believe that partnership, that public partnership with philanthropy, public-private and philanthropic partnership, is the way to move forward. We are planning the next 10 years of Bedrock. And we're beginning to look beyond the urban core, and we're looking at an industrial district, and we're looking at building up more homes on the riverfront area. And we're also, frankly, planning an innovation district to grow new business and grow new jobs. That's what we're doing right now. But we're doing this carefully and with a Detroit Regional Partnership with the city, because we believe that we have a collective responsibility to innovate and create the new public, private, and philanthropic partnerships. Entrepreneurs like Dan Gilbert took a look at the way things were being done, and they came up with new ways outside of the normal to create new models of doing business. And that's what we all have to do as we come out of this pandemic. So look, I assure you that Bedrock will be doing its part to help provide a positive impact to the cities of Cleveland and Detroit. And I totally look forward to watching Monique lead you all in transforming the efforts right here in Greater Portland. Thank you.
There's much to do. Thank you, Kofi. It's not only inspiring to think about how we all need to get our sneakers on and start running the race together, but thinking about those inspirational moments that happen across urban centers and have been done before. So thank you again for bringing that perspective here to all of us in the Greater Portland region. In the middle of the pandemic and social unrest this past year, one of the nation's premier banks, PNC, chose to expand in our region. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next guest, which is J.T. Hutchison, Regional President and Head of Corporate Banking for PNC. Come on up. Good to see you.
How are you?
I'm well.
Good.
Welcome to Portland.
Thank you.
Welcome here this morning. It's good
Yeah.
to see you in person.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, this is awesome. It's just so cool to actually be doing this live. Kofi, you were speaking my language. Public finance being the theme, one of the underlying themes of your discussion. It's critical. I spent 14 years in public finance, commercial, and investment banking. So Monique, you and I actually share some common roots there as well. But thank you, Kofi. Those comments were spot on, I think. And just real quick, awesome job to the entire GPI team for pulling this together.
Yeah, it feels good to be here in
Yeah.
person. And I know you're relatively new to Portland. It's been 1 year, yeah?
Just over 1 year. That's right.
Yeah, congratulations and
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's for those of us who aren't as familiar with PNC, love to hear a little bit more about PNC and why. Why Portland? Why expand here in the Portland region?
Sure. I'll give you a little bit of the background on PNC first. For those that aren't familiar, it's an East Coast-based bank, so relatively new to the region here. I actually would flip the question back to you quickly. Do you have any idea what PNC stands for?
No idea. I tried looking it up and I'm like, I'm not finding anything.
It's somewhat of a trick question, not quite fair, but it actually stands for nothing. PNC was the formation of two large Pennsylvania banks back in the early 80s, 1983. Specifically, it was the largest interstate bank merger in U.S. history at the time, actually. The banking laws had just changed, which provided the opportunity for Provident National Bank in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh National in Pittsburgh to form PNC. So we took the letters of both of our parents, but it actually does not stand for anything anymore. Fast forward a little bit, I've been with PNC for about 15 years. I joined just before the financial crisis in 2007. Like to make big life moves during crazy times,
Yeah, I was going to say there's a pattern here.
But so PNC was a relatively small, geographically constrained regional bank when I joined, about $100 billion in assets. I don't know where it ranked at the time in terms of size relative to other banks in the country, but probably around 30th or so. Fast forward 15 years, about three large acquisitions later, some smaller acquisitions in there, and some de novo growth, and we'll talk a lot about that today with our expansion in Portland. We're now the fifth largest bank in the country by assets, and one of four banks that has a true coast-to-coast local presence. So scale-wise, drastically different organization, but culturally very consistent with when I joined the bank again back in 2007. Portland specifically, I think it's an incredible region. So I've been here for just less than a year, or excuse me, just over a year. My wife and I and our Great Dane and unborn son did the drive across the country from Philadelphia in July of 2020, which was an adventure. She was 35 weeks pregnant at the time, my wife was, which was a challenge to say the least. But yeah, so so we got here and had the baby in August. The wildfires and the smoke hit in September. Then we have this, and COVID's underlying all this, right? And the social unrest that we were experiencing last summer also underlying all of this. We knew about those things coming in. Then we have this ice storm that hits, knocks power out for a week in the winter, and then we have this heat dome experience this year. I get calls from my family and friends all the time. What were you thinking?
Welcome to Portland.
Welcome to Portland. But in all seriousness, we could not be happier here, just as a family, and with regards to how PNC is growing the business here. I think we're just very well aligned with the community.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, it's always important to know that context. Like you're new to town, and then. Well, curious to know more about what your team and your office that you're building here is focusing on, really, for the region.
Sure. We selected Portland. I mentioned de novo growth, and I distinguished that from expanding through acquisition because we deliberately decided to move into Portland versus acquiring a bank that already had a presence here. So we picked Portland for very specific reasons. I think culturally it's a great fit for the institution. We have a team that was already based here, which also added some impetus of building a bigger platform around that team. That's our affordable housing tax credit team. So we have about 50 individuals that were already in Portland. It's best kept secret. In fact, they've been here since the late 90s, really originating tax credit equity investments in affordable housing projects. So critical business for us institutionally, but obviously also near and dear to the region in terms of providing for affordable housing. So that's one bucket of what PNC focuses on in the region. The second is the team that I've been building out, which is our corporate and institutional banking team, which is really focused on delivering financial services for middle market and large corporate companies. And every bank defines that a little bit differently, but for PNC, that's really companies that range middle market 25 million in top line to about 500 million, and then large corporate for us is about 500 up to the largest companies based here, the Nikes of the world. Slightly different approach in terms of how you kind of solicit to the middle market versus the large corporate, given the banking arrangements and relationships. But that's the second focus, so building our portfolio of customers there. And then the last focus, and he's in the room today, but my second hire in market here is our client and community relations director, Brian Stewart, who's really leading our community engagement effort. So we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a little bit. But a lot of effort focused around making sure PNC philanthropically and foundationally is aligned with the community.
Yeah, thinking a lot about what Kofi was sharing, that trio of supportive partnerships, and thinking about PNC. When you speak on behalf of PNC, what do you see as the future of Greater Portland?
Well, I think when we were moving in here, I spoke about some of the calls I got from friends and family, right, about just what was actually going on in Portland and Greater Portland. I do think we have some issues to figure out, right? There's outsider's perspective looking in. There's jurisdictional confusion with regards to the various governments that are aligned in the region. So figuring out or kind of sifting through some of the confusion there and making sure people understand who's making decisions, where there's overlap, where there's underlap is critical, I think, to just generally of being able to attract businesses to move into the region. I'm not going to say that I've figured out that jurisdictional confusion at this point, but we're working through it and we're trying to figure it out. I think we have a big perception issue that we've been talking about, all morning, right? So figuring out how to and Kofi, I appreciated your remarks earlier around telling the story of what made Portland so attractive for the past 15 years before the pandemic hit and some of the other issues have surfaced. So going back to what we were and trying to figure out how we can leverage that going forward, I think it's critical to moving forward. And obviously figuring out the affordable housing and the houselessness issue generally is critical to us being able to find a path forward. So all of those things aside, we have things to figure out, but generally we're super bullish on our engagement here. We love the industries that are based here, whether it be the food and bev value chain from growers all the way to food service delivery, the tech industry and obviously the semiconductor space, very strong here, advanced manufacturing, very strong here. All things we're as a financial institution, we can support those types of efforts. And again, the core of what I think made Portland successful in the past is absolutely still there. Yeah. And can certainly be leveraged going forward.
Yeah, scalable opportunities for jobs and for growth in those market businesses. That's great. So kind of along that thematics of economic development and growing and thriving, what does your organization think needs to be done to ensure that businesses like yours continue to grow and thrive here?
I think we need to leverage the cultural alignment of large companies that may be looking to expand and grow and invest with the tenets of what make Portland philanthropically tick. So I'll give you an example of PNC and why it kind of culturally fit for us here. PNC's largest philanthropic initiative is something called Grow Up Great, which is a early childhood literacy focused initiative. We're in year 16 of that initiative now, focused on children ages 0 to 5 and ensuring that they are not in a worse off position as they start their journey through life than others that maybe have more advantages at birth. So that aligned perfectly with Multnomah County's recent passage, last year's ballot measure of preschool for all. So we've been institutionally trying to be a leader in that here locally, and we could almost immediately click with that initiative. So finding other things like that also are critical cultural priorities for companies, I think we need to line that up and line it up better. That's one piece of it to attract more businesses here. Again, because I think the core of the region is there. We moved here for a very deliberate reason. We love all the amenities that are offered of this part of the country, right? Where I come from in Philadelphia, God bless Philadelphia, I love it, but it's not doesn't have the outdoor amenities that we have here, right? So I think there's so much that's already there that we just need to continue to leverage. But that cultural alignment is something that we probably haven't done enough of, and something that we can think of, and as GPI is kind of facilitating their plans moving forward, it's something else, another strategy to think about.
Awesome. Thank you for that, JT. It's a lot to think about and a lot to consider as we forge the roadmap ahead. I appreciate it. Just let's give JT a round of applause for being here and being here in Portland. Thank you. Another company that recently chose to expand in the greater Portland region is Twist Bioscience. We're now going to hear from their CEO and co-founder, Dr. Emily Leproust.
So at Twist, we make DNA from scratch, and our customers use our DNA that we make to improve health and sustainability. For instance, you can use DNA to create diagnostic tests that will tell you, for instance, if you have cancer at stage 1 or 2 instead of stage 3 or 4. You can use DNA to develop therapies, drugs, such as antibodies or vaccines. You can use DNA to produce chemicals from fermentation of sugar instead of oil, which is a lot more sustainable. You can also use our DNA to engineer bacteria in the soil to deliver nitrogen to the root of plants instead of using fertilizer, which is very unsustainable. And you can even use DNA to store data for the long term. Our headquarters is based in South San Francisco in California, but we need more production capacity. So we're expanding into Wilsonville, and we are planning to add about 200 jobs in the first year, and over time go up to 400 jobs in the current plan. So we are very excited to expand from our headquarters in San Francisco into the greater Portland area. It's a great area for us to do so. There's fantastic talent pool. There's a great tech awareness and great support for bioscience companies such as ourselves. There's a great cultural fit between San Francisco and Portland. And then last but not least, it's very close to San Francisco, and so it's a day trip for engineers that will have to go back and forth between the greater Portland area and San Francisco. So overall, couldn't be more pleased to expand into Wilsonville. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for Twist and for the region.
Once again, please welcome the President and CEO of Greater Portland, Inc., Monique Claiborne.
Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to present today the inaugural Greater Portland Champion Award. In thinking about this award and the theme of today's event, we wondered what defines a champion. We wanted to honor someone whose contributions to our regional economy inspired you. A member of private sector who advances regional prosperity. Someone who goes over and beyond their daily work to positively impact our community. We turned to our investors to nominate someone worthy of this award, and they told us Toby Martin, local CEO, is such a champion. Toby leads Extensus, a pioneering digital asset management company that breaks barriers to creativity. But Toby goes over and beyond. He serves on the steering committee for TechTown Diversity Pledge, which pushes companies to create a more inclusive tech community. He's a founding board member of Rooted School, which will be Southwest Washington's first charter school when it opens next year. Rooted is recognized as one of the most innovative public school models in the US and aims to help students gain entry-level jobs in technology directly from high school. It is my honor to present the 2021 Greater Portland Award recipient, Toby Martin.
Thank you, first of all, for the opportunity. Congratulations to Monique for a fantastic event. I know we've heard it before, and I'll say it again. It's great to see you all not 2-inch screens on our laptops and various different monitors. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story in just a few minutes. There's going to be an arc of connecting philanthropy with business. So first, to Monique. As one of the CEOs of a traded sector company here in Portland, we have about 100 employees. We've been around for 28 years. I haven't been CEO that long. I'm not quite that old. We are one of the beneficiaries of you being part of this community. So thank you so much for all the work that you and GPI are doing in the greater Portland community for the traded sector. One of the pieces about GPI in the Portland community is it's an incredible thing to see so many businesses working on philanthropy simultaneously. So I took over as CEO about 2 years ago at Extensus. So 6 months before the pandemic, not quite like Kofi was sitting on his couch in the midst of it, or all the rest of us who are all in various different places. One of the brand pillars that we established at the time was we were going to use business as a force of change. We're going to participate in philanthropy in the communities in which we benefit, that we live, that we take from. It's time for us to give back at a greater level. So speaking of public giving and philanthropy, we established a public philanthropy benefit and a budget for all of our employees to be able to go out, do volunteering, and contribute more economically to the city. Through those things, I reached out to TechTown, Kimberly, Jared, and their team, and said, this is something we'd like to do. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is more than just recruiting in, but it's also from doing things in the community to build homegrown talent. Through there, I was introduced to Jonathan Johnson, who was the startup CEO of the Rooted School, as Monique mentioned. This school first opened about 6 years ago in New Orleans. Subsequent schools have opened in Indianapolis a few years ago. We're opening in 10 months in Vancouver. And at this time, literally right now, they're going through a capacity interview to open up another school in Clark County, Nevada, for Las Vegas. So through the community connections, taking business, moving into philanthropy, and going fully into philanthropy, we're opening up that first charter school in Vancouver. It's the first one in Southwest Washington ever. The nearest one's about 150 miles away. And so what it's allowed us to do, and again, why the benefits of Greater Portland, Inc. is that it's not driven by borders. It's driven by desire. It's driven by the need to do things in the community that connect for-profit organizations with philanthropy. So, as I said, as a traded sector organization, we're a Washington corporation with office headquarters in Portland, offices all around the world. But this allows us to cross borders, give back to the communities, and see the benefits of philanthropy in our communities. So I'll conclude with a couple of things. Something that I say to my 17-year-old all the time, and I get the eye rolls that we all do from teenagers, which is perfection and efforts, not necessarily results. When you talk about Portland and revitalization, I'm just going to say it's continued vitalization. We've all been working on this for a long time. You all have been working on this in many ways, in many forms, during the pandemic, before the pandemic, and I look forward to us getting back to it after the pandemic. So I'll say, Monique, to your call to action. I know all of us here are ready to lace up. I'm ready to lace up. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all the work that everyone here does to build the greater Portland community, and thank you for your time.
Wow, congratulations, Toby. That's awesome. So we're about to wrap things up, but before we do, we have something really special, and I am actually really excited to introduce to the stage Greater Portland Board Director and Hillsborough Mayor, Steve Calloway.
Good morning to each and every one of you. Now, before I was mayor, I was an elementary school principal. And sometimes I'm asked, which one is harder? Well, as a mayor, I've never been kicked or bitten by a 6-year-old. Now, I've also been asked about leadership books that I have read and used in both of my roles. And so I want to share a couple of those books, a couple of those titles with you that are appropriate today. The first is The Little Red Hen. The second, Stone Soup. So we're going from Business 101 with Monique to children's literature with me. Now, these books may surprise you, but many leadership principles are shared at an understandable and memorable level in children's literature. Now, you may remember that the little red hen lived in the same house as a dog, a cat, and a mouse, and one day she finds some grain and asks, "Who wants to help me plant this?" "Not I, not I, not I," is the reply that she hears. So she plants it, and then asks, "Who will help me water it?" "Not I." "Who will help me weed the wheat?" "Not I." "Well, who will help me cut the wheat, take it to the mill to be ground, bring it back, and then who will help me bake a cake?" "Not I." "Who would like a piece of the cake?" "I would, I would, I would," the little red hen hears. You see, not everybody wants to contribute to the work, but we all want to share in the results. Now, in Stone Soup, there are several hungry soldiers who enter a small village, and they ask for a meal, but time and time again, all that they're offered are excuses. So, as you remember, they borrow a pot, they fill it with water, they start a fire underneath, and they ask 3 stones for the pot. And now they have everybody's attention. And they're asked, "What are you making?" "We're making stone soup." Somebody says, "Well, I'll bring you some salt and pepper and spices, because every soup needs some flavor." And somebody else goes and gets carrots. Another gets cabbage, potatoes, barley, turnips. And the next thing you know, there is a feast, not just for the 3 hungry visitors, but for the entire village. Now, set these stories aside for a minute and remember the goal that Monique spoke about, which is in the next 10 years to be responsible for recruiting 20,000 new jobs. These jobs will spur existing business growth, create additional new business attraction, and bring new capital investment to the entire region. This is transformative on a scale, what we've heard about today. And it's transformative on a scale that make others sit up and take notice. So now, getting back to the little red hen, GPI is like that little red hen. She's not asking for any single housemate, the little red hen. And GPI is not asking for a single investor to do it all. But neither can GPI do it all by itself. We're just asking for a little help. We're asking each of you to come up with a name of somebody that we can reach out to and invite to be an investor. Who will help GPI plant the seeds of business recruitment? Who will help GPI nurture the relationships and share the possibilities? Who will help GPI harvest the results? Who will prioritize the name of a potential investor? I will. And who wants a slice of the final outcome? We all do. So, think about, who do I sit with on boards and committees? Who is in my neighborhood, or my social or learning or professional circles? Who do I golf with, do yoga with, work out with? Who's on my relay team? Who is it that I can recommend to GPI? All we're asking for is a name. We're not asking you to sell tobacco products to 3rd graders, right? Now, as in Stone Soup, I can say that as a former elementary principal. Now, as in Stone Soup, GPI is not asking for a single investor to provide all the food. But if we each bring what we can, then imagine what we can offer to businesses. We can offer a region where there is collaboration, partnerships, and delicious results. Our small contributions, our small investments, can have an outsized impact on the outcome. We can create opportunity for 20,000 new jobs, and we can transform our greater Portland region. And as you leave today, across the street is a beautiful mural painted on the side of a building. And it says, "Hey, you're a part of it." And so I'm asking you, will you be a part of it? And your answer is, I will. Thank you.
I brought you something.
Cool.
Stone soup. Thank you for the wisdom and the stories. Do you mind holding this for a second? Oh, thank you. I will. It's such a great morning, a nice, inspiring way to start and just reflect on all the things that we've been experiencing in the last 19 months. And so thank you for bringing us home with those two lovely stories. So we have something fun. It's the raffle, not stone soup. For attendees here in person, you can win. And those of you at home, you can win as well. If you're live in our audience today, just raise your hand when we call your name and come to the edge of the stage, and Amy will help you get your award. And if you're watching from home or the office, just acknowledge in the chat, hey, it's me, and we'll make sure to get the award to you. All right, you ready? You ready? Let's do this. Our first award is from our friends at Hillsboro Hops. I'll hold it, and you can draw it out, Mayor. How about that? 4 field box tickets to the Hillsboro Hops game.
Fine. F-E-I-N. Steve Fine. And that is a fine name.
That is a fine
Steve.
name.
I like it.
Congratulations, Steve.
Congratulations, Steve.
Woohoo! All right, you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Now we have one night stay at the Hyatt Regency Portland at the Oregon Convention Center.
This name is Tim Cook.
All right, congratulations,
Tim is in the
Tim.
back.
Nice bow tie. All right, next up, we got to get our drum roll timing here. 2 Portland Timbers tickets to the home game season next year.
Sherry Bennett.
All right, congratulations, Sherry. All right, Portland Thorns and FC fans, 2 more tickets to home game tickets to see the Thorns.
Serena Stoudemeyer.
All right, congratulations, Serena. All right, 2 more to go. This one's from the Portland Trailblazers, a Trailblazers autographed memorabilia voucher.
And this is Janina Messenger.
Congratulations. And now for the grand finale, 2 Alaska Airlines tickets anywhere they fly domestically.
Steve Calloway. How's that? You know, I
Not me.
I just want to point out, it's not just that you get to fly an Alaska round trip. It's that you also get to take off from the Port of Portland, which once again was named the best airport in the world. Yes. And the person who wins the round trip tickets on Alaska Airlines is James Graham.
Congratulations, James. Mayor, thank you. Yeah, I'll give that to you. Enjoy your soup. And your books here. Yes, very important. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for being a part of the 2021 Greater Portland Economic Summit. I just want to thank again the CEO, Monique Claiborne, and the entire GPI staff for putting together a great event. To the Spirit Media team, you're always the pros. Thank you. And our keynote speaker, Kofi Bonner, and our special guests, JT Hutchinson, Emily LaProust, and Mayor Calloway. Thank you. But most importantly, thank you. Because our champions of transformation are here right now in the room, and I know you know that. Or watching from the home or office, you too are a part of it. We will see the recovery we've all been working for when we rise up, when we work together, and we commit to becoming champions of transformation. On behalf of Greater Portland, Inc., thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.